Now, let's talk about budget, right, Wajiro?
Right.
What about the budget?
Of course, we're at the beginning of a new financial year. We are also facing the ravages of COVID, the ravages on the economy, the pressure on the health system. Like we were discussing, we have children out of school. So government, through the budget, needs to make choices about what to prioritize in the coming year. COVID has found the president, the government, at a point where they have prioritized the Big 4 flagship projects, which are, really the president's flagship projects. They are projects that are national, that seek to provide economic growth, but they also have a very strong attachment to the administration, because every administration wants to say, this is what we did. And so, if you recall, last year, the president unveiled the Big 4, which was focusing on agriculture, building houses, and, also the health, universal health care. So the decision to be made right now is, where should the money go? And the government has, prepared the budget, has a budget, actually, that has a set of priorities that when we look, that actually has been criticized, not even just by civil society actors, but even the Parliamentary Budget Office did a critical review and said, we need a budget that stabilizes the economy, that cushions those affected. And so we need to put a stop, maybe put on hold some of the development projects which are, based on growth because of COVID. So COVID actually needs to make us stop and redirect the finances. So our concern is that this hasn't happened. And so we've asked a budget expert, who the International Budget Partnership works on budget processes. They build capacities of citizens, actually, to monitor the budget, to be involved in the budget, because public finance management in Kenya is guided by principles of transparency, public participation, and accountability. And IBP is very key in terms of promoting, those principles, working with communities, and also working with the Senate and the National Assembly and Treasury at that, in terms of giving advice. Yeah. So we are very fortunate. Today we'll be joined by
Abraham Rugo is a country manager at International Budget Partnership Kenya. Good morning, Abraham.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you doing?
We're well, thank you. Welcome to the Situation Room.
Thank you very much.
You've heard the introduction that Wanjiro has given to this topic that we're discussing this morning.
Yes.
It's about the budget. So just shooting straight off, your basic and immediate views on the budget that was presented to Parliament and the budget that's now in effect.
Yeah. So thank you very much. The budget that was presented, of course, every year the government, that is the executive government, both at the national and county level, tabled their budget estimates for the coming financial year on 30th of April. But because there is an East African precedent of reading the budget at the same time, the minister still comes to read the statement, and you noted it was highlights of the budget. So the actual budget had already been presented. By the time it was being discussed, actually it had been approved.
Yeah.
Now, this budget was, of course, every budget has been incremental. In other words, the budget for the following year is always higher than the previous one. But this one came at a time when we were expecting some real injection of realism and reality of what was going on. And this is because of the situation presented by COVID. But even before COVID came, already economic activity had been on a decline in the previous year. By the time we were closing the calendar year 2019, by 31st of December, we had missed revenue targets by close to about 200 billion.
Yeah.
And now that's not small amount. When you have missed your target by close to 10%, you then need to start asking yourself questions. And this was really being affected because of job losses, of companies shutting down. So my take of this budget is that I felt it did include a deficit that was too big to handle, because the current deficit at 841 billion, assuming the grants that are assured for projects will come. So grants are monies that are given to a country by different development partners. And that is assuming they will come. Otherwise, if they don't come, then the deficit is likely to shoot to the upwards of 1 trillion.
Yep.
But at the same time, the public debt, so the loans that we are paying as a country, the repayment was already increasing. And this year alone, we are at 904 billion.
Yep.
904 billion against an expected ordinary revenue, or basically, and it's like, you earn 100 shillings, and already you are expected to spend about 50 shillings of that on paying debt.
Yep.
So that for me was really the measure that you have a deficit that is even, is almost at the same level or as
your debts,
non-discretionary expenditure.
Right.
In other words, there's no negotiation. So you have two figures that you have to know what to do with. For me, that worried. But on the positive side, I felt that the 8-point stimulus agenda that the president stated, and also that had got money, was a move in the positive direction, only that I felt it could have been given a bit more policy and cash attention. So
explain that. When you say that it might have required a lot more policy and cash attention, in what shape and form does that come?
So when you look at the entire economic stimulus program, it's budgeted to spend about 56 billion. Now, 56 billion in a budget of 3.2 trillion. And a GDP of about close to 10 trillion. What basically that means, it's a drop in the ocean. When you say, for instance, kazi mtaani, to create jobs for 100,000 youths, when you have close to 5 million, if not more, of youths who are unemployed, then again, that's a drop in the ocean. So I felt it could have been given. Of course, it is not that the only money that will be spent in the economy is around the economic stimulus program, but already, because of the things I have said before, where you have a huge public debt obligation of close to 1 trillion, which means that's not money you can inject in the economy. That's money that is going out of the economy directly. And then what you are injecting for direct mitigation, because the others are more health mitigation. So the amount of money that has been given to Ministry of Health, it's more health mitigation in terms of ensuring their PPEs, in terms of testing is possible, in terms of more doctors and nurses to be able to take care. But in terms of direct employment creation that is meant to save companies, small and medium enterprises, I feel there is still more space. And that is only to be managed by you creating more room, basically giving yourself more room within your budget to be able to move money around. Because basically how it works, the more debt you have to pay, the higher the deficit, then it means that you only have so much that you can continually inject into the economy. And again, it's based on an assumption that economic activity will resume as soon as tomorrow. So as soon as today, with the president opening the movement in Mombasa and Nairobi. But that's not how the economy works. Economy works when there is money circulating within the economy, and therefore consumption. But when you have so many people who have lost their jobs, and they're technically, it's you and I actually who run the economy. Because it's those who are employed who are able to employ a house help, a gardener. When they go to the office, they have somebody washing their car at the car wash. They go to the barber. And they are the ones who organize the gigs, where then the DJs will come and play, will organize the parties. So you see, and those are the people who are losing their jobs.
Yep.
So they need to see all the connections of the dots.
So what is the role
before
of business people if those who are in employment seem to have taken the helm of ensuring that the economy continues functioning?
Sorry, the role of?
Business people, what is their role?
Business people, their survival is dependent on whether there is money flowing in the economy. Now, one of the biggest consumers within the economy, inevitably, is government. Because they are the ones who purchase certain goods, certain services. But at the same time, remember, people only purchase if they have the means and they are wherewithal to do that. Therefore, the business people can't bring their goods. They can provide their goods and their services. But if there is no demand, there is no even if there is, people want but they cannot afford, then it becomes very difficult to say that the business. For instance, you don't expect business people to inject money into the economy, because they depend on that economy to be able, it's like oxygen. Money is like oxygen. They basically depend on it when it's circulating and when there is money moving. Yeah. And that is all connected with employment, or rather means of income. I don't think employment is the right word. Everybody having a means of income, a household income. But at the same time, remember, if you think about the business people who run businesses that depend on selling goods, for instance, from China, from all these countries, the supply chain had been disrupted for the better part of last year, and it got worse at the beginning of this year with the COVID. You remember some time back, even the president taking personal attention on the number of containers that had remained stuck at the port of Mombasa for quite some time, almost a year. And those who are goods that the businessmen had to pay for the loans and what have you, but they didn't have the goods to sell. So it's that circulation, and I don't think it's right to depend on businesses to try and resuscitate the economy. That's the job of government.
Yeah. So there's economic experts. I believe your institution as well, the Parliamentary Budget Office, have been made proposals into this budget, really focusing or advocating for stabilization rather than stimulus. Listening to you, obviously the government hasn't quite bought this agenda, that the priority now needs to be to stabilize the supply and the demand side of the economy as opposed to shooting for growth. How else can we get government to listen? And if they're not going to, what are we likely to see happen?
Thanks, Wanjiro. When you read the report of the Budget and Appropriations Committee that is chaired by Kimani Ichung'wah, and you read the input of the Parliamentary Budget Office, it says the very things we are talking about. What is surprising is that even after having made all the observations that they made, they still went ahead and approved the budget as was. So then this takes it to a realm of politics, and I think it is right to say, I think the executive needs to be a bit more realistic. I agree that the goal is to stabilize things before you try to create stimulus package. And how do you stabilize? The goal here was to make sure that companies don't shut down, that people don't lose their jobs, that people don't go into, the economy doesn't get into a mess. But remember, the amount of money that was available to be able to move around in the economy had shrunk so much because of the public debt obligation and the pension obligations. And then a continuation of business as usual, even when things were already starting to show red signs. So I think I still push this to Parliament, because that is where the responsibility, in all honesty, lies. Because they approved this, they saw the deficit of 841 billion. I mean, they raised the same concerns. They made the same. You remember John Buddy raising these very concerns that our deficit is unacceptable. Our debt repayment to revenue ratio is out of shape completely.
Yep.
You know, because you can't be planning to spend about 60 shillings out of every 100, and the 100 shillings is an expected income in the future. It's not money you have in the bank.
It's not cash in hand.
But I thought this same parliament also plays a part in allowing the country to raise its its borrowing capacity.
I mean, definitely. You see, once you approve a deficit, you technically approve the borrowing.
So then why do they then turn around and talk about the debt that we have as though they do not know what it is and that they didn't participate in actually bringing it to what the levels it's at?
For me, I find that not right. I mean, both at all levels. Morally, it's not right. Legally, one could argue yes. But already the PFM Act has already been flaunted, although it was changed now that our absolute debt is an absolute. I mean, our debt is an absolute figure, not a percentage.
Not a percentage, yes.
Abraham, you allude to some kind of political inclination when it comes to making some of these decisions. But I look at other countries in the world who go through the same budget making process with individuals who are also politically inclined, but for some reason they're able to set that political inclination aside and make a decision that is right for the country. What needs to happen for these steps then to be taken? Because it seems to be an excuse that we use time without number, not just in Kenya, by the way, but in quite a number of countries, even in sub-Saharan Africa. And we say, all right, this decision was made because somebody was politically inclined, they leaned a certain way. But if we're looking at the whole picture, where a country is either saved or destroyed, then that cannot continue to be an excuse in terms of decisions and how they are made. So what needs to happen? What steps then need to be realized? And for people to understand, and when I say people, I mean the people for whom it matters, the masses, the population, huge. What needs to happen for us also want to understand that this is how the process should actually work. And I ask this because I find that when people have an understanding of how the process should work, then even in the agitation then takes a different trajectory. So what really should the process be?
So I don't think we have a process problem because, I mean, if you look at our PFM Act, our Constitution, and the process that has been established, there are very clear steps. Technically the budget is actually normally approved in February because that is when we have a document called the Budget Policy Statement that states the broad spending lines that even anticipates what will be the revenue expectation for the coming financial year. Remember, this is 4 months before the end of the financial year. Now, our democracy, as per the Constitution, is a parliamentary representative democracy. In other words, we have moved a lot of the representation decisions of oversight, of legislative making, and of representation to Parliament. And that is why then every document, particularly on budget matters, right from the country's development plan and the county level, coming to the budget policy statement, which basically outlines the broad sectoral spending. All these documents are approved. So by the time the budget estimates come to the House, they have gone through a process of conversation, and I think I'll just then be just saying, then we have a system that has completely gone wrong,
right,
to the core.
Yeah.
Because I mean, what pains me is that when you read the documents from Parliament, they say the very things I am saying, the very things we are worried about.
Why do you say it's a system? Why do you say that we have a system that has gone wrong?
When I say the system has gone wrong, is a system that observes that the patient is sick, but still goes ahead to send him back to work.
No, it's not the system. Systems are created and managed by people.
Okay, I mean, you get where I'm going with this.
Same.
That yes, we have a system by the constitution. You see, we are not talking of. It's not something that somebody does what they think and imagine. We have a framework that we have approved in laws. We have a framework that we have approved in the constitution. We have institutions of parliament. We have the institution of the national treasury. The concerns we are talking about are concerns that have been observed. But why then things continue on a trajectory of business as usual? I think for me it's a worrying. What then should the people do? I think we have not maximized the possibility of people's petitions, which I think is critical. Is critical. So it's
Should
a
we not
critical.
ask the question why it is that our elected leaders and other leaders who are appointed, should we not ask the question why it is they all seem to make decisions that benefit them individually?
Well, that's
Because everything that we are saying, the decisions that are made in Parliament, the decisions that are made elsewhere, it all seems to point to not what will benefit the country, but what those who help make those decisions will benefit from the decisions that they make, and then damn the rest of us.
I think the challenge is, and you're right on that, that a key part of our politics has really become almost a mechanism of personal gain from public processes. And as you were discussing slightly earlier, that all the corruption cases that we now are messing us up have to do with actually that use of public resources in ways that are not right. But as I'm saying, the role of representation, unless we change the constitution, unless we change our laws, lies straight right now within the framework of parliament.
So, Abraham, what you're telling us is, I think, something we know, but it's useful. You're saying Parliament goes up to the point of giving us a very credible report, but the decision they make is still political. And so the problem we have is how to deal with the political culture.
And the decision is not political. The decision is commercial. How
but it's made within a political
how
space.
They stand to benefit. It's not political.
Right, but what we are saying, if we are to diagnose the problem that we have, it's with the political, because it's our political representatives are not protecting our interests.
They most definitely aren't.
And this is a problem that we changed the constitution and we have generated a lot of laws, and we are still trying to get political accountability.
I actually don't.
How do we get political accountability?
I don't even think they even consider us.
No, it's not. Look, let's
We're
just
not
be very
even
clear.
in their thought
We're not
process.
in their
We
we're
don't
hoping,
feature.
that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. It's like we are hoping there's going to be some kind of miraculous change from the very beginning. Because, okay, let's take an example as a court of law. When you're trying an individual, what is the one thing that they look at? They look at the intent. And the intent then is what, in many cases, they use to prove their case. The intent for majority of political leaders from the very beginning was not in the interests of the people. So if you look at it from the very beginning, if your intent was something totally different, there's no way you're going to ask somebody in the middle of all of this to please change your interests and now start suddenly to do things or to legislate in a manner that is going to benefit the people. If it was never in your agenda from the beginning, it is very difficult to change a course when you've already started the journey.
The only thing that they consider or where they put the wananchi into consideration is what they think the wananchi will want to hear. For instance, those lovely reports. Oh, Parliament has given a lovely report. And then they go and do the complete opposite of what they have suggested. So, at that point, we do not feature.
It's a mix. It's a mix of everything from where I see. There's a commercial side, there's a political side, and then there's and I keep going back into two institutions. One is the National Assembly. This is a budget-making parliament as per our constitution.
Yes.
And
Yes,
then
that's correct.
they are the officers at the National Treasury. And I keep asking, so yes, we talk about these people are sharp. I mean, each one of them has very good credentials. They come up with this budget. They advise the government on how to the next steps to take. The political decision makers have already come and said, this is what I'd like. They've come with their wish list. This is what I'd like to do in the next financial year. The people at the National Treasury come up with a solution, which is what we see being taken to Parliament. Parliament sits and they can clearly see that there are mistakes here and there, and some of these mistakes are definitely politically influenced. But Parliament goes ahead and writes a report, but goes ahead to approve that report because of the politics, and that's why I see the politics coming into it. It's the political play. How many do we have? What are the numbers that we have in Parliament? Who are we answerable to? Are we answerable to the people, or are we answerable to the powers that be in the executive? And if they feel that they're more answerable to the powers that be at the executive, then they will sing to the executive's tune. And this is where now the whole chain goes around and around. Because like you're saying, Abraham, report is taken to Parliament. The Committee on Budget and Appropriations looks at it. The Parliamentary Budget Office looks at it, pokes holes, and says, for instance, we have been implementing a Big 4 agenda, and yet we don't have an implementation matrix. First things, what are these milestones that we should be looking out for every year when you're approving the new budget? We don't have those clearly labeled milestones on saying, all right, on healthcare, this is where we should be as we are approving the next budget. They said that in their report. You don't have milestones, you don't have an implementation matrix, and this is all wrong. But then when it comes to voting, the political decision is then made to go ahead.
Yeah.
I think it's right to say that the way our budget. So I try to say that this is not really so much a process issue, as it were. But as you've rightly noted, it's really the mix of the technical and the politics, and the politics seem to carry the day. But more importantly, not just the politics within Parliament, but even the politics of the executive. And I think you've rightly observed that. Our concern has been how then do we utilize the same institutions for purposes of achieving that which is important. And as I've said, I think there's still a lot of space for people's petition. One of the things that has been very concerning, at least for me, is that there is still very few people who say anything when this budget process is happening.
Yep.
And I appreciate that some of us feel that maybe it's a waste of time. But the truth of the matter is it's better when it's on record that we have raised certain concerns, that we have raised certain observations, than when we say, no, let them just do what they want to do. They are our representatives at the end of the day. That may not be happening the way we desire, but I still feel that there is still a lot of space to people's petitions, to people raising their concerns, even when things do not necessarily go the way we expect. Because, for instance, right now, I mean, let's be very honest, our revenue projections are not adding up. So the 1.64 trillion that we are expecting to collect, with the expectation that, for instance, even with the reopening, Kenyans are more excited with the reopening to try and run away from their problems. So if you are really feeling painful in the city, you run to the village. If you are locked up in the village, you run back. But it's not necessarily to come and do any economic activity per se. Tourism, the summer bunnies are not coming. So we don't expect much of, again, a touristic activity, even if the fees have been halved.
So basically, we are unlikely to collect 1.6 trillion shillings this year if we did not even collect it last year.
We didn't collect it. I mean, the financial year that just ended 7 days ago, we missed our revenue target by a huge margin. This year, I think my estimation is about 1.4, at most 1.5 trillion. And with 900 billion already going for debt, then you're left with just about 600.
In the room, CT Muga Nduoko, Eric Latif, Wanjiro Gikonyo, and on the line is Abraham Rugo, who is the country manager for International Budget Partnership Kenya. And we are talking about budget and looking at the 2020-2021 budget and, what it seeks to finance. And already Abraham is talking about, the huge deficit, the huge debt, and revenue projections. That's where we were, Abraham, before we went to the break. Our revenue projections, you're saying that at best you see us managing 1.5, and you're very ambitious, I think.
Too much ambition breaks a man. John Uganda. But having said that, the reason why I am concerned is that with income tax going to already taking a huge dip because of companies having to declare people redundant, having to lay off people. Then you expect an income tax has been accounting for about 44%, though on a decline of our revenue, of our total revenue. Again, the two consumption taxes, VAT and excise duty, is unlikely to unless for those for basic commodities, which many of them are zero rated or tax exempt. I do not see. And also remember that import duty is a factor of incomes. So it's when companies are working or people are working that they import, they are able to buy cars. Banks have already registered that there are very few people doing asset financing. So because of all that combination, then it is likely that our revenue takeoff might only be happening towards third or fourth quarter of the financial year, which is basically 2021, as it were. And therefore, because of that, I think it is critical to do two things. One, to get into a discussion with the people who have loaned us the money, with our debtors, and just be able to discuss how can we reorganize some of the repayments and push it. I don't think we can get a waiver. So we can get a debt relief, but we can get a waiver and say, okay, fine, can we make some of these payments
at a later date?
At a later date. But remember, most of them are commercial, and therefore discussions with commercials are sometimes very, very complicated. A second one is to basically work on reducing the deficit by balancing the budget, because a huge portion of the money that is going to finance the deficit is money that government is planning, about 443 billion, to borrow locally, which then means even in a difficult economic environment, you and I will have to be competing
with the government, in borrowing the banks.
Borrowing, and of course, a bank will not give you who is not sure of a job or of business alone. It will give government, because government is almost an assured debt. So I think for me, those are two critical things. In fact, one of my desires has been to know when a supplementary budget will be tabled, but then we can balance this number.
But what is the role of organizations such as yours? So this budget has been in the public domain since the 30th of April.
Yes.
We are now already in the new financial year. Organizations such as yours and others that work on empowering the public and educating the public, what role have you played in educating the public about these kind of things, and even asking for those corrections?
Good. Thank you. I will put on record, and Shiro is aware of this, that right from the beginning of the time I talked about in February, we have been doing two things. First of all, of course, we do mobilize and train. We have trained budget facilitators in about 36 counties, and we did draw them. For instance, we prepared an 80-page memorandum to the Budget and Appropriations Committee that brought together 114 people spread across 24 counties. And the things I am speaking about are things we wrote and tabled. So, and when we read the report, it seemed to agree with some of the, you get my pain.
Yep.
That we never come to say things in public that we have not raised with the respective public officials, including at the national president, when they ask for memorandums. We are writing this year, I think alone, at IBP, we have written about 8 or 10, up to almost 10 memorandums on different topics: COVID financing, the emergency regulation funds for COVID, the COVID Senate Committee, we did send them a memorandum, the Budget and Appropriation Committee, the Senate Finance and Budget Committee. So we do write these things, and we do actually put it up and say whoever wants to engage, this is the time. So on Twitter, on Facebook, and on different platforms, and we are seeing an improvement in the number of people who are starting to get interested and are starting to engage with these spaces. Of course, training at the local level is a critical piece, and we've been trying to mobilize as many people as can engage, while appreciating that it's only when we have a critical mass of people speaking about these things that then you can start now making progress as it was. So trying to do our best to train, to engage, to speak to the right policymakers on these matters, and hope that somebody will take action and do the right thing.
Yeah, Abraham, you're talking about the supplementary budget as being an opportunity to really push for a realistic budget, because right now we have a budget that is not realistic. And I have two questions. Should business, religious, civil society, should we let government off the hook in terms of this stabilization agenda? Because it's one thing for us to say, well, reduce, let's rationalize and reduce the revenue targets, let's reduce the expenditure. But are we saying that reduce it so that we can cushion businesses? Or do we buy the government narrative that business can sort itself out as long as we balance the budget? So that's my first question. And then my second question is the supplementary budget process is there's a gap in the law, and this, the provisions around transparency, around participation are not as strong as the mainstream budget. Of course, this is a technical gap in the law. In the spirit of it, there should be public participation in all. How can we, even if we decide on certain priorities, how can we realistically hope to influence a supplementary budget where you with 140 institutions, 8 memos, which is 8 memos is maybe 4 or 5 face-to-face engagements with relevant committees. If that didn't work, how can we hope that a supplementary budget process will work? So my first question, should we let government off the hook in terms of cushioning? And two, is the supplementary budget really going to help us?
Absolutely not. We must not let, I think we have a role, we owe it to ourselves and to our future generations to consistently engage and speak on the matters that affect us. I feel this is if there was a time when government requires engagement, both within Parliament and even within the National Treasury, it's at this particular time to consistently raise these things. To say that, look here, unless we move with speed, there are still businesses that are still holding on, but they need support, because it's very difficult once you've laid off people to try and get them back. So we cannot. I don't think it's an agenda that can just be let off. I think the truth of the matter is that now the stabilization agenda has moved down the river, but it's still a critical piece, and that's why I'm talking about the balancing. So the balancing here would basically be meaning that yes, we are saying we are biting the bullet and saying this is not possible. Let us be realistic. Let's rationalize. Let's create more money that we can inject into the economy. And the only way you do that is by reducing your non-discretionary expenditures. So basically, is reducing amounts that you must spend. Supplementary budget. I mean, the engagement, the law has no provision for public participation and also the transparency of supplementary budget engagement. But by all means, it is the only mechanism that we have right now of trying to fix things, trying to balance things out, moving forward. My concern, which is also your concern, is that who is listening, and who is able to take action on this, or do we just wait until the push comes to shove, and then decisions have to be made during a fairly desperate time, and that's why I say I think the citizen petition power has a lot of space. What will it be if all of us were writing letters to the president, to the National Assembly, to
Mr. Rugo, I want to take you back a little bit.
Yes, please.
I'm actually very impressed by the activities that you've outlined that you carry out as an organization. But the question I want to ask it, to what end? What is this thing you hope to see at the end of all these activities, writing memos, training people? What is this outcome that you hope to actually see? Not achieve, see. What are these things that we can actually say, aha, we see the effects of all these processes? What is it?
So I think for me, there are two main things I want to see. First of all, that the public services that are critical for the most poor and vulnerable, and the vulnerabilities are currently increasing, are actually being achieved. So in other words, that the social contract is being honored. I think for me that's the biggest achievement. But accompanying that is that the key tenets of transparency and equity, and government accountability that are being actualized. So the second one is a process issue. The first one is a critical outcome, because what is important is that healthcare is being provided, water is being provided, security is being provided, because these are the things that we pay for as citizens, because politics across the world continue. We've lived in different countries where politics are as heated as here, but the question of critical public services is not a matter of debate. How can it be a matter of debate in this country? That we have to debate whether we have healthcare or we don't have healthcare, or whether we have water or we don't have water. We should be debating how to improve. Those are the fights in other democracies.
Indeed.
Not whether, depending on who you elect, is when you have water or you don't have water. That's not a discussion, honestly. So for me, as long as critical and every service that a Kenyan deserves is being provided, and as I've said, vulnerabilities are increasing. Many of us are one salary away from falling into the poverty group, and therefore we need to assure for those who are already are struggling that they can be provided for these services, and also assure for others who end up falling into those very, very, very spaces that they can. So for me, that's all I want to see. In all honesty.
Great. We're still on the line with Abraham Rugo, who is the country manager for International Budget Partnership Kenya. We have been talking about the budget. As we come to the close of this hour, Wanjiru, you've got a burning question.
Yes. Abraham, what would the response to business look like? Yesterday we were trying to do some simulations here. Has IBP managed to, kind of think through a little bit, crunch some numbers that can give an indication? Because Kenyans feel this is a bit unrealistic, whereas others think, yes, it's doable. I don't know what would we be looking at in terms of this kind of support?
Yeah, I think we haven't done any numbers, but I will share my thoughts. One of them is a thought that I have not found any reason to dispute that was advanced by David D. about the Lifeline Fund. Of course, that would have been very, very valuable if it had been done at the time when the idea was raised 3 months ago, almost 4 months ago. Of ensuring that business do not lay off people. So basically putting in money, and it's not necessarily free money. It's money on concessional, it's loans on concessional terms, at zero interest that will be paid back, but basically to make sure that businesses do not shut down. So now seeing that quite a number of businesses, apart from those in the service, a couple of critical service industries have shut down. I think then we are now looking at basically, a revival of businesses. And I still believe that zero-rated loans is the way to go. I don't think anybody wants free money, per se. But basically, they want facilitation that will make sure.
Sorry.
Yeah, I know that.
You have some. Just give me.
Yeah, when you say you don't think that anybody wants free money,
business.
honestly speaking, I think if the way it is that if people could get access to these funds that we are talking about without the burden And if that is what can be defined as free money, I think you'd have a lot of takers when it comes to the situations in which we look at ourselves now.
We
A
actually
lot
did-
of takers.
We did a quick
No, no,
survey.
what I'm saying is that it's not free in the sense that you just use it the way you want.
Yeah.
Right.
But you need to be somebody who has
Responsibly.
been running a credible business. You've
Yep.
been paying your taxes. Now you are not able to pay your taxes, and all you are asking for is to be able to keep your business running. So you
Afloat,
don't
yeah.
need a loan with an interest. You just need a zero-rated loan,
Right.
and you will pay it back at a later point when businesses come back to normal. Because it is in the government's interest that you continue being a taxpayer if you were to look at that very selfish perspective. And that's why I'm saying I think there is still a lot of value in that. The second one is to address the challenge of, so a lot of businesses, especially sole proprietorships, are affected by the limited disposable income that they have, because they still have to pay for a lot of costs. So I think by government starting to, pushing to ensure that a lot of services that citizens have to pay for double, in terms of water, in terms of security, that these become assured services, that you don't have to incur a lot of costs, for them, that public health services are available for all, they are functioning properly, NHIF is running properly. That then has an effect in terms of how much money then you can inject into your own business, rather than paying for private services as it were.
Yeah.
But thirdly, is to break business into the different spectra and focus more on the micro, small, and medium enterprises. The tendency when it comes to bailout is to bail out the big boys. Sometimes the connection is obvious, it's political and the like, but the people who create and drive any economy is not the big boys. It's the small businesses that employ 5 people, that employ 10 people, that employ 15. So basically it's the MSME. And that is where the focus should be, if you ask me, to make sure that these people are able to resume their businesses. And of course, lastly, we cannot avoid some mass employment program. So the example of Kazi Mtaani program needs to be scaled up. The reason for that is that anytime you go into a recession, a depression, a recession, like what we are basically getting into, is that you need to find a mechanism to inject money into the economy. And over and above giving cash transfers to the orphaned and vulnerable children, you need to give people an income that give you a return for a service. So that
is the service that's being earmarked for Kazi Mtaani the right service?
Maybe not.
Is cutting grass and collecting garbage
What is needed?
what is required?
I think there are a million options. Kenya has moved. We have a highly employed. There are many other options. Teaching children that are at home, organizing how they can be taught. There are many other options. Online kind of services. We're just getting into digitizing of the Ministry of Lands. You could employ so many people to go and type all that. Do all that clerical work. We have people who are computer literate. The options are endless. So I don't think clearing bushes is the only option.
Thank you for speaking to us today, Abraham Rugo. Yes, one final comment.
One final comment, yes. I think we owe it to ourselves to engage in the governance of this country. We cannot give up, however difficult it gets.
True.
Thank you very much.
Challenges for organizations like yours to empower us by giving us the information
and we keep on engaging.
Asante sana, Abraham Rugo, Country Manager, International Budget Partnership. Before you go, listen to today's proverb from CT Muga.
For the sake of peace, hard decisions must be made. This is a Tanzanian proverb, or saying, really.
For the sake of peace, hard decisions must be made.
Cancel unnecessary budgetary expenditure and put
For the
it
sake of
to-
peace.
Yes.
Abraham, thank you very much and have a
Kenyans.
good day.